Hello, and welcome to my presentation for this semester of Quarantine Psych class. My name is Aaron, and today we're going to be talking about basic wireless deauthentication attacks, along with some wireless hacking. What is a wireless deauthentication attack? At its base, it's a standard denial of service attack. Some frames are sent, a host is booted from the network and is no longer allowed to associate with the access point of the wireless router, and then the host is forced to re-authenticate. One of the reasons this attack is interesting to me is the fact that there's really not a lot you can do about it. There's no easy fix for it right now. There's not much a user can do to prevent it from happening, and it's fairly covert. An attacker doesn't even need to be part of a network to launch the attack. How does it work? It really all comes down to a vulnerability in the contemporary 802.11 wireless standards that we're using today. A deauthentication frame is a type of management frame that is used by the wireless standards to terminate connections between a host and access point. Management frames also have other purposes. They're often used to probe networks and see what networks are available to the user and what networks the user can connect to. The problem is management frames are not encrypted, and there's really no way to confirm who is sending these frames, and it's very easy to spoof the MAC address of an access point and send a deauthentication frame to the host on the access point's behalf, with the user being none the wiser. While it's very annoying to lose your connection to an access point or router and to lose your connection to the internet, that's not the only problem with this. Losing these connections causes more problems, and they're often used as a vector for more serious attacks. One of these attacks is cracking a WPA2 passphrase. Oftentimes in homes and small offices, you're going to see WPA2 personnel implemented as the wireless standard security framework. And everyone's going to be using a passphrase or a pre-shared key to connect to the network. A deauthentication attack is used to obtain information that is needed to perform a brute force or dictionary attack on that network's passphrase. So once a user is booted from the network, they're forced to reassociate with the AP, and when they're doing that, they're performing an initial handshake for WPA2. That handshake can then be used by the attacker to crack the network passphrase. I will mention, though, it's more fashionable these days to crack it using what's called a PMKID attack. That does not require deauthentication, but that really depends on the equipment that's being used. Another problem with deauthentication attacks is they're often used to get the user to connect to an evil twin or a rogue access point. The attacker will send the deauthentication flood targeting all of the hosts that are connected to the legitimate access point. If a host connects to the fake AP or rogue AP, their credentials could be phished, the attacker could eavesdrop on traffic or inject malware. Monitoring traffic isn't as serious as it used to be with the widespread implementation of HTTPS and things like certificate pinning, protections like that, but it's certainly serious if a attacker can phish credentials and gain access to the network and pivot from there, or inject any malware onto that network. Oftentimes, attackers will create a captive portal on their evil twin to phish for network credentials. There are some ways to mitigate these attacks, but none of them are foolproof. Physical controls can be put into place. You can turn down the transmit power on your access point, or you can make your walls resistive to incoming radio signals. Yes, that is possible. One of the more interesting ways to mitigate some of this was I saw someone who set up a wireless adapter to sniff out management frames, and then they stored them in log management software like Graylog, so that they would at least be alerted when the authentication frames were being sent. A while ago, another standard was also created, the 802.11w standard, known as the Protected Management Frame Standard. And that was really it was created to prevent deauthentication attacks, but it wasn't widely adopted. And it's not really going to be widely adopted until later. Protected management frames was a way to stop these attacks, and the good news is that PMF is going to be required in WPA3, which is going to be the next security framework that people are going to use on their wireless devices. So as more devices adopt that framework, deauthentication attacks should become obsolete someday. Some final thoughts on all of this. If you do have WPA3 available, it is on some devices right now, then use it by all means. The problem is that all the devices in the router or access point will need to support it for it to work. Of course, deploy WPA2 Personal whenever you can and make sure that the passphrases are long. Most people recommend 12 to 14 characters, and make sure that they are random. You can also deploy WPA2 Enterprise, which is 802.1x, on your network and avoid the shared passphrase or pre-shared key altogether. Another thing you could do is use a wireless intrusion prevention system if you're in an enterprise environment. These help prevent against evil twin attacks. Although the funny thing about a WIPS is that oftentimes when they see one of their clients connecting to an evil twin, they will send deauthentication frames to disconnect the client and protect them. So once PMF is implemented widely, it will be interesting to see how these intrusion prevention systems actually work or how they change. Okay, and now I'm going to do a demonstration of a deauthentication attack. First I'm going to go over how I've set this up. And right now I'm on a Windows machine. So I'm going to show our configuration here. So right now I am connected via Ethernet wired connection to a Linux machine via SSH. And you can see that local configuration kind of over there. And then I am also connected to a wireless access point I have set up over here. And I just want to make note of our hardware address. I'm going to highlight it so we can see it. That's going to come into play later. And then I'm also going to note that our default gateway address is 192.168.1, right there. Alright, so I'm going to head over to my Secure Shell session. And this is at a Linux computer again. This is where I'm going to launch a deauthentication attack against myself. I'm not really going to delve deep into setting up this rig that I'm using to do this attack. There are so many tutorials online about how to do this, and I really have no desire to reinvent the wheel. Suffice to say, you do need a wireless card that has a chipset that is capable of packet injection and going into monitoring mode. I'm going to be using the Aircrack suite of scripts today to launch this attack. You can also use other applications as well. BetterCap is another popular one. So it's already loaded in the command history because I've been practicing this. But first what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the arrow dump script, and I'm going to listen to traffic on the access point that I'm connected to. So we're on channel 11, and I put in the hardware address of the access point, and then I have my wireless interface right here that I'm going to use to listen to the traffic. And we're going to listen to this and see what clients are connected to the network. And so we're monitoring the traffic right now. We can see that we're using WPA2 Personal on this with a pre-shared key. And now we can see that we have someone that is connected to the network. And if you remember, I pointed out this hardware address. Well, it's the same hardware address right there. The computer is connected to this wireless access point, and I can see that from the Linux machine. So that's good. I'm going to make a note of that MAC address. I'm going to Control-C out of that. So now I'm going to start launching a deauthentication attack against myself. So it's going to be done with the air replay script. -0 means you're launching a deauthentication attack. 0 means you're going to launch it infinitely. A is for the access point and the hardware address of the access point there. And C is the client, which is the client that is my computer that is connected to the access point. And then we have our wireless interface that we're going to use to launch the attack. First though, I want to go over back to my machine, and I want to just kind of confirm that I am connected to the default gateway on the wireless interface on this computer. So I'm going to ping our default gateway continuously and make sure we are connected. There we go. So it looks like I'm getting responses back from the default gateway. So we're going to launch the deauthentication attack, and we're going to see how long this lasts. As you can see, the deauthentication frames are being launched. And if we go over to the machine that I'm on, we can see that request timed out and general failure, which does not sound good. So that is a deauthentication attack. I am no longer in contact with the default gateway. And it's in fact unreachable because I keep sending deauthentication frames continuously. Going to stop that. Stop that. And that is a basic deauthentication attack. One thing I'm going to pull up towards the end of this is what this looks like in Wireshark. This was a PCAP file I obtained from the Linux machine when I did the attack. As you can see on the top, it's from that wireless interface. I also put in a capture filter, so it would only capture deauthentication frames. If I didn't do that, I'd be capturing a lot more frames, and it'd be a little bit confusing to go through the PCAP file. And if we kind of look at it in depth, we can see the transmitter address and the source address appears to be coming from the access point, when in fact it was not. And we can see that in fact it was a deauthentication frame. And this is what booted my host offline. I only did that deauthentication attack for a few seconds, but in those seconds you can see I basically launched about 4,442 packets. And I think that's going to be it for my presentation and my demonstration today. Thank you for watching the video, and I want to give a special thanks to Marcus Carey for teaching a class during quarantine, and I have greatly enjoyed it and learned a lot. Thank you very much.